Hi, I'm DC Coleman, a developer at Nywick Atlantic for the SCAP Compliance Checker, or SCC for short. And in this video, I want to show you how to become more fluent with the SCC command line usage. This video is number 4 of a series of short videos designed to help users rapidly get up and running and become more proficient with SCC. While you already may be familiar with the graphical user interface of SCC, the SCC command line can be an extremely useful component in ensuring compliance by automation by scripting. The GUI and the command line are both complementary in that changes from one are going to reflect in the other. That is, the selection of content in the GUI will be reflected in the command line and vice versa, for example. Now, you can't do everything with the command line that you can do with the GUI, but you can do most things. So after installing SCC on your system, you're going to want to open a command line terminal and go to the location where the SCC binaries are located. By default, these are located in Program Files on Windows and under /op on Linux systems. Since I am on an Ubuntu 18 system for this demo, we'll change directories to /opt/scc. If you issue the command ll, you're going to notice several files such as the SCC binary that you use to launch the GUI, which is SCC, and a binary named cscc. This video will be divided into two major portions. Number one, the command line for single commands, which is used in automation and script development, and the cscc configuration portion, begun by typing cscc tac config, which we'll dive into right now. Before we begin this section, I want to start off by noting one of the most important tools that you should know about that you're going to have in your SCC tool chest, and that is the cscc tac help command. Most of the SCC related questions can be resolved with a combination of cscc tac help and the SCC user manual. In your command line, go ahead and type sudo /cscc tac help. There are 4 sections in the help text. So the first one is configuration parameters, which are for installing content and configuration you can't combine with other switches. For example, cscc tac config, which we're going to talk about in just a second, and that covers SCC's configuration. We're also tac set opt, which will set a specific option that may not be available in the SCC GUI options form. Scanning parameters for scans such as tac cd to change directory temporarily just for a scan. There are post-scan report switches like tac s that will generate a summary after a scan and a result after a result has been created. And finally, there are informational parameters, usually items that you list out, such as tac get opt, which will output the value of any configuration option the user specifies. These notes listed in the help file under cscc tac help or cscc tac ? should serve as a reference for you when you're using the command line. So the first item in the configuration parameters in the help menu is the tac config parameter. Typing cscc tac config opens up a menu that displays several configuration options at your disposal. If you're following along, go ahead and type cscc tac config and look at the menu. So the top level menu is a choice of 9 items, under which there are 2 lines noting the status of streams being enabled. And there's one for SCAP and there's one for oval streams. So now if we choose one, what it's going to take us to is it's a list of all of the available SCAP content, and all of the enabled items are going to have a next to them. So in this case, we don't actually have anything enabled. So I'm going to press 1, and it's going to enable it. And you notice here it says SCAP content 1 of 2 enabled. You can press back. You could press 0 or type back to get back to the previous menu. So I'll go back into it and I'll press 1 again. This is if you want to disable the content. And now you'll notice SCAP content 0 of 2 enabled. And if I press 0, it says 0 of 2 enabled. Back at the top level menu, choose the second option to go to the Configure SCAP Profiles item. And so now you're going to have two options here that you can choose from. The first one is if you have a specific profile that you want to apply to a specific item of SCAP content. Here I'm going to choose the first item to do exactly that. And I'm greeted with this screen that says no SCAP content is enabled. So what we're going to need to do now is go back to the original screen and choose one for configuring SCAP content. And I'm going to choose one because I want to enable that bit of content. And so press 0 to go back, and then press 2 again. Press 1 to select a profile for a specific SCAP content. And now we see some content is actually available, and it is the one that we displayed earlier. So what I want to do now is I want to select that content to view all the available profiles, and I'll do that by entering its number. And so here is a list of all of the profiles that we can apply to this bit of content. So in this case, I'm just going to choose Max 7 Sensitive and see it's changed in the menu. Press Return to go back to the original menu. From here, I have to go back into Configure SCAP Profiles. And now what I want to do is I want to select a single profile for all SCAP content. So I'm going to press 2 here, and I'm going to say no profile selected. And what this does is it takes all of the SCAP content that you have and sets a profile for it. It doesn't have to be enabled. It has to exist on your system. This is a scenario where you're scanning multiple systems and you want to just apply this profile to all of those. And so press enter to return, and we're back at the original menu. The largest component of cscc TAC config is without a doubt the options section. Press 6 to go to the options configuration menu. This section is essentially a command line driven version of the SCC GUI options form with checkboxes for configuration items just like the GUI version. For an in-depth look at these options, try the SCC manual or the third video on SCC, the graphical user interface and options, as I will only briefly discuss these configuration items, and I may not cover them in the level of detail of the manual or that video. Pressing 1 to go to the scanning options, you're going to see the menu starts with options on whether to perform SCAP or oval scans. This essentially means that if you have perform SCAP scan, for example, the SCAP content you have enabled will be scanned, and if you don't have it selected, the content won't be scanned. And the same goes for perform oval scan. The SCAP processing section has some options related configuration items that are used at scan time. Likely the most important of these is the run all SCAP content regardless of applicability option. And to give an example of this, this might be where you're on one particular platform, but you want to run content on a different platform anyway, such as running Ubuntu content on a RHEL host, for example. The oval processing section is likewise full of scan time options. Note that items 8 and 9 are related. 8 will enable oval item creation threshold, but we'll set it to whatever value you put in number 9. So if you want to change the value held in number 9, ensure you enable item number 8 to get it used in scanning. Finally, in this section are some options for WMI SSH scanning. You can set the number of threads that you want SCC to run locally if your machine seems a bit slow, set timeouts for starting on remote systems, or options related to the remote base directory. Press 0 to go back to the main options menu, and then press 2 for the content options menu. There are going to be items related to the actual content itself that SCC runs, like how to treat newer version of the content, XML schema validation, XML digital signatures, or allowing completely invalid content. Some of these are advanced options and designed really for scenarios in which a developer is experimenting with new content or writing new content. So now going back to the original options menu and now selecting 3 takes us to the reporting menu. Here you will find configuration items related to the reporting output generated by SCC, such as if you want all settings included or just a summary or both. One important usual configuration item is the report file itself. You might want to think ahead in terms of how you want to consume the report generated by SCC and whether you want to display it on a web page or in a browser, which case you would select 5, or just generate a text file off somewhere. Maybe you could choose 6 here. Additionally, you have the choice of generating XML results files. And so options 7 through 13 cover those, including if you want to save XML results even though the CPE test fails. This is a scenario in which, for example, you tried to run Ubuntu content on RHEL, for example, and didn't choose the run content regardless of CPE applicability option. Summary Viewer is just an HTML header file that you can save that will give you a page that has links to other specific reports within a scan session. This is especially useful when you have several streams to be scanned. Finally, SCC can store the information from your scan in a scan session database. This is useful only for the GUI users of the application. If you anticipate that you would need to view information about the scan in the future in a graphical user interface, you can select this, and a database file will be written so that you can access it at a later time. Now going back to the options menu and pressing 4 is going to take you to the logging options menu. There are only 4 options here, and they're pretty self-explanatory. They're going to save logs according to what you specify here. The screen logs are everything that appears in the SCC GUI console at the bottom. The debug logs are separate from the application logs and will end up in the logs folder with a timestamp and the name debug in the file name. Verbose trace logs are a level of debug logs with significantly more debug information than regular debug logs. You should use caution when using this level of debugging, as the logs are going to quickly eat up space on your drives. Finally, you want to suppress, or you can suppress warnings by selecting the Suppress Warnings checkbox. Okay, going back to the options menu now and pressing 5, it's going to take you to the output menu. Here there are going to be options related to where you want to store items, like the options file, or where to keep the logs and stuff like that. The first option here is to deal with the location of the options file. The default location is going to be under the running application directory. In Unix, this is under /opt/scc. The next option, SCC security configuration directory. This is where you can choose the SCC security configuration data, and that would be stuff like secure shell, keys, and items related to the host credential database, which is something that we're going to talk about in the graphical version of SCC, as it's not available in the text version. The fourth option allows you to choose a place for all of your reports or logs. And the range of the 5th through the 13th options are all related to results. The results directory and the amount of detail in which you want to subdivide the directories. Here in this section, we're talking about the report file names, and it's kind of similar to the above with the subdirectories, whether you want the subdirectories to exist. Here, you're allowed another level of granularity when it comes to, in this case, file names or what is in the file names. So if you want to put in a target name on each of the file names or SCC version, if you want a date stamp or time date stamp, that's probably very useful. Um, if you scan multiple versions of SCC, uh, that might actually be pretty useful. And of course, target names, that's your system name. So that's going to be important too. So really, however you want to set it up. And that's why we designed it. We've designed, I know that there are a lot of options, but this gives you so much control over how the application works and how you want it to work. So number 18, finally, you can lock down the permissions of the results and logs with this option. What this is going to do is it's going to set the permissions for the logs and the results to be only for the user who's currently running SCC and the root user. So this would be important for scenarios in which you had a multi-user system um, and you are running it as you are running SCC as you, and you don't want anyone to view the result but yourself or the root user for that matter. Okay, going back and then pressing 6 to go to the Secure Shell file transfer options. This is not to be confused with the SSH scanning capability that is within SCC. When you scan a bunch of systems, you can set SCC to transfer the results somewhere, and this is where you can set that up. And what you can do is you can use a username or password or even a private key file, and then test that connection by option number 8. Okay, now go under number 7 under update. So here you can control both updates to the application itself and updates to the content. Those are two separate things. The content is updated every once in a while as well as SCC. If you're behind a proxy, you can set that information as well. So under item 5 here, you'll have the application itself periodically check for updates and regulate the frequency that it does and give a URL. The same goes for the content inside SCC. Note that if you do, you're going to get a timestamp here next to item 5 and 8 on when the last update occurred. Though there is a manual way to check for updates that I'm going to show you in the command line portion of this video, this is a way to do it in the background. Lastly, please note that there are two main differences between the app update URL and the content update URL, in that you can add multiple URLs as content repositories. And lastly, 8 and 9 deal with SCC tailoring, which, if you're not familiar with, that covers the ability for SCC to create an XML file that is customized to only run certain portions of the XCCDF stream. And so it allows the user to select and deselect certain rules and also allows their modification. Additionally, you can create a new profile starting from an existing one. Discussion on how this works is really outside the scope of this video, and it's going to be addressed in another video. However, the cscc config options menu does allow for the selection of a new profile or the selection of a tailoring file that you've already made. Okay, so we're pretty much done here, but the final part of the options, now that I've exited the options menu, is none of these changes are going to take effect until you until you complete what you're doing, and then press 7 to save and exit, or press 9 to save and exit and start a scan. That's here and here. You could also press 8 to exit without saving your changes. So this concludes part 1 of the SCC command line, the options and configuration portion. The next part 2, is going to discuss the commands associated with CSCC. Thank you for watching.